You're listening to the Talking Headways Podcast Network. This is Talking Headways, a weekly podcast about sustainable transportation and urban design. I'm Jeff Wood. This week we're featuring a Railvolution one-on-one conversation between Carlos Cruz-Casas of Miami Dade County and Grace Perdomo of Transit Alliance. Grace and Carlos chat about the Better Bus Project, an advocacy-led, community-driven redesign of the Miami-Dade bus network. Stay with us. Today's podcast is brought to you by our super generous, amazing Patreon supporters. It's 2022, and we're celebrating 8 years of the Talking Headways podcast. So to join this merry band of infrastructure nerds and zoning wizards, go to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. $10 a month will still get you a bus-only scarf. I promise I'm still working on new designs and formats. $2 a month will get you stickers and a handwritten note, but any support is welcome and much appreciated. That's patreon.com/theoverheadwire. Today's podcast is also brought to you by the projects of The Overhead Wire. Whether it's our daily newsletter first established in 2006 or our audiobook version of Raymond Unwin's 1909 classic Town Planning in Practice, find out more today at theoverheadwire.com. Today's podcast was produced in partnership with Railvolution. To find out more about next year's conference in Miami or the National Learning Network, visit railvolution.org. That's railvolution.org.
Well, hello there, and thank you for tuning in on what we hope will be a fun and entertaining behind-the-scenes coffee talk on how we got to redesign our bus network by putting our community first through a unique partnership between a transit agency and a local advocacy group. But before we get into much more details, allow me to go into some introductions here. My name is Carlos Cruz-Casas, currently an assistant director over strategic planning at the Miami Dade County Department of Transportation and Public Works. I know it is a long name, but if I could summarize, I would say we're more of a mobility management agency, an agency that plans for and operate public transportation for the county, including within its 34 municipalities. And we have full control over mobility, from traffic signals and signs, traffic engineering, highway engineering, bicycle pedestrian, paratransit, and even the regulatory arm for for-hire vehicles, taxis and limos, and before the state preempted us, Ubers and Lyft. I'm also part of the National Steering Committee for Railvolution and the local host committee for Revolution Miami 2022, where we have a great lineup of amazing initiatives currently ongoing in our community, such as the Gold Standard South Dade BRT, the phenomenal linear part under our heavy rail guideway known as the Underline, and probably my favorite these days, the recently approved full bus network redesign, which will bring a strong network of high-frequency routes to our urban core. We call it the Better Bus Network. And on that note, today I'm thrilled to be joined by Grace Perdomo, the Executive Director of the Transit Alliance Miami. The Transit Alliance Miami is a local transit advocacy group that has set their roots here in Miami to help our community strengthen their voice. And before I get more and more talking about this, Grace, I would love to hear from you and get our conversation started, getting to know you a little bit more. How you got to be the ED of a strong transit advocacy group, and perhaps tell us a little bit more about why mobility, why cities, what was that sparked your interest?
Thank you, Carlos, and welcome everybody. Thank you for having me for this important conversation. I joined Transit Alliance recently, and regarding sparks and what moves me, I love exploring and visiting and really getting lost in cities, right? My background is in architecture, urban design, and city planning. And over the past 20 plus years of professional practice, I have worked across the country with very diverse communities with distinct opportunities and challenges. And my city design and city planning work has often focused on understanding what makes cities tick, right? The relationship between all the elements that make up a city's DNA, its history, its geography, its culture, its movement. And in every planning process, in every planning project, whether it be about land use or revitalization or economic development, transit and mobility really is the one component that connects all of them together, connects people to place, and connects people to opportunities. I'm really excited and passionate about projects throughout the country that are looking at repurposing and reclaiming and really reimagining urban infrastructure and really trying to improve these underutilized assets for promoting better mobility. And the other thing that really moves me about the work that I do, that you do also, is this issue of trying to understand how everyday life in our cities is increasingly defined by commuting, right? That whole experience of a collective daily movement of residents, of visitors in a city. And these experiences, these daily journeys are really transforming life the way we live it. So in a city like Miami, we have to get this commuting right to build the sustainable future, right? It's a collective effort. That's why this magic collaboration between your organization and Transit Alliance was so effective and successful. But I'd like to pass it on to you. What sparked you to move into mobility and transit?
Yeah, no, it's phenomenal. It's just an amazing story. Mine is not so much so distant from yours. I have worked in the private sector early in my career and moved into the public sector, where I took the role of Chief Transportation Manager for the city of Miami, worked on projects ranging from planning to implementation, from bike lanes to transit corridors, launched a car share program, and then the bike share program at the city. When I joined the county about 6 years ago, I was asked to find a way to bring mobility innovation to our community and to explore how we could achieve better mobility outcomes without having to build major infrastructure. And my response was very simple: better bus service. So I was asked to take on that challenge of rethinking how we do transit in Miami. It's not an easy thing. My first response was, we cannot do this alone. It's a huge task. Immediately reached out to other cities across the nation and joined other agencies at the Transit Center Working Group. And it was right about that time, Grace, that I met and started to work with the Transit Alliance, right? I think, this is a good conversation here for us. Is, to the best of my knowledge, this is the first of its kind collaboration, right? A public sector and a transit advocacy group working together to completely transform the way our community moves, which is that heartbeat that you were mentioning earlier about our community. And it all started with the Transit Alliance. You have probably heard me before, but I'm proud to say it again. The Transit Alliance Miami gave our community a voice. And thanks to the tenacity of my dear friends, Marta Vicedo, As Chogle, Derek Holmes, and you, Grace, and of course, the rest of the TA team, we're here today. So I guess beyond you and the experience, I want to ask you, Grace, why? What drove a group of involved citizens to get together and dedicate their time to improve transit for our entire community?
Yes, and that really points to, again, the convergence of both vision, aspiration, and also action, right, which are key components of collaboration. It really started out the conversation in 2015, a set of enraged citizens, really, that were looking at budget cuts, were facing budget cuts at the county. And Transit Alliance, its first inaugural campaign, helped stop those budget cuts, right? Which would have made a service that wasn't functioning to its full capacity and potential even worse, particularly for low-income and minority transit riders that rely on transportation to get to work, to get to schools, to access healthcare, et cetera. And with that campaign, we very quickly realized that buses, like you just said, are the backbone of urban transportation, correct? They offer affordable mobility and connect citizens with every aspect of their daily lives. They move people quickly. And when you consider that 4 out of 5 transit riders today in Miami-Dade County ride the bus, and that 2 of 3 transit trips are served by the bus system, then really what we felt needed to be tackled first and foremost was to address improving the bus system. So in 2018, we released a mobility scorecard and also a campaign called Where's My Bus? Again, as an effort to really elevate and give a voice to the many residents in the county, and that elevated the visibility and the urgency of the countywide transit issues. And we combined that with doing a very deep dive into data and on-the-ground research and released that report to the public. And that's really where this campaign of the Better Bus Network came from. The campaign looked at 4 solutions, and it was really the catalyst for our collaboration, right? For getting the mayor to, at the time, to come on board and really consider that we needed to be looking at redesigning this important transit component in our city.
a complete change of practice, right?
Yes,
This is a
correct.
complete change of practice. It is a community getting involved, getting organized, and raising their voice and say, we want a better transit, we want better outcomes, right? I often go back and tell people, this all started with one message: we can do better. And,
Yes,
and we can do better, and
correct.
together we can do that. It was not easy. I can tell you from the public sector, right, and from our side, we had to let go of certain elements. We had responsibilities. We had to step aside, right, if you will. We need to, we had to lead the Transit Alliance to lead the initiative and manage the community outreach. You mentioned that we had a small team of consultants from Jared Walker and Associates taking the technical leadership, and then our entire team from the Division of Service Planning and Scheduling and members of the transit operations rolled up their sleeve to help deliver the plan, right? But it was more than that, right? We worked closely with many stakeholders and partner agencies, just like at our municipalities. And most importantly, you mentioned it, the participation and feedback of thousands of Miami Dade County residents have made this effort to want to replicate in the industry, right? So to me, it was very interesting to see where typically two entities, if you will, that don't speak the same language sometimes, right? We ultimately, and I think that was something interesting that happened on our side is you were saying one thing, we're saying another thing, and it was not until, we're able to get into the same level and said, what we want is better mobility, better outcomes. Forget about the numbers at this point. What do we want, right? And I think that was a pivotal point for me. I'm not sure about you, but I tell you that at least on our side, we had to let go of our ego, right? So sometimes, in public sector and private sector, people think that you have all the solutions. And I think we need to open up and understand that the people that know the system, the people that write it the most, and basically open up and allow organizations like yours to organize that voice into a strong message. And that we needed to see the big picture. And I think that's what we did, right? What was it like for an organization at that time? Transit Alliance was a small organization, right?
Yes,
But
very true. And it required us to think through how do we organize these very complex set of issues, engage the end users, which in this case were transit riders, and advocate and, in effect, create change. We are, in effect, translators, right? Very heavy, complex data. How do we break that down for community members to understand that? We quickly realized that people want to learn, people want to drive change, and people really want to be a part of community and effectuate that change. So as you mentioned earlier, this became the first grassroots-led bus redesign in the country. It was a major project that is reforming a 30-year-old bus network, designing it really with the ground up with community input. And it's the first time in the country that a nonprofit organization was leading this effort. So as you mentioned, Carlos, we knew this would only work, this vision, this goal would only work if the community was at the table. So we designed a process for community engagement with very, very clear communication channels, both online, offline, and in person, by meeting riders on the ground, at bus stations, at transit stops. We created portable workshops. We created an interactive website, all with the goal and the intent to really make it a collaborative effort. As you mentioned, we hired nationally renowned bus expert who had done this kind of work throughout the country, Jared Walker. And so there were many pivotal moments through this process, right? The community had to evaluate certain trade-offs, and that's never an easy conversation to have. We had to be provocative at certain point in order to engage people and vice versa. And in every public engagement process, Carlos, as you know, there's always loud voices, there's voices of support, there's voices of opposition. We had to work with the commissioners, we had to work with multiple municipalities. Miami Dade County has 34 municipalities. So again, we collected data, we engaged riders, and the end result is what you see today that we're all very proud of. So.
No, and that's phenomenal. And I was there, but I really even sit down sometimes with coffee and just kind of think about it. Think about, what we were able to achieve together. And it was not easy, Grace, I'll tell you, right? You said that, you had to get creative, right? We need to get the attention of the community. I still remember the 24-hour bus ride marathon.
Yes.
right?
That's right.
When the Transit Alliance rode buses for 24 hours consecutively, and they were actually
Videotaped live.
videotaping live and having that conversation, right? And that was great. And the message was loud and clear, right? And
Yeah.
coming from the community. But at the same time, so, you can imagine that we're not always, align with the message and some of the tactics, right? And sometimes we wanted to, take a deep breath and just think more about the outcomes, right? This is part of the course. We need to kind of to go through and understand that we might consider approaching the problem differently, but at the end, if we are aligned on the goal, that's what we need to focus on, right? And ultimately, that's what we wanted to kind of get on, and that's why we're here today, right? It's been a long time, and you mentioned it. We've done, and you didn't get into the numbers, the magnitude. It was almost 180 community stakeholder meetings, right?
Yes.
Right. It was a lot of pop-up meetings at the transit stops. It was social media, emails, surveys, something that I felt there was
Text
very
lines. Yep.
text line. Yes, I was going to say, I think text line was one of the most innovative things. People think about innovative things about, I don't know what else new technologies, but texting was such a great way to get people engaged. So in my mind, the Better Bus Project, now the Better Bus Network, has been by far the largest community engagement in our recent history, right? And to
Absolutely.
me, it was very clear. It was very clear, and it was phenomenal because we started, like you mentioned, everything by listening, right?
Mm-hmm.
Listening, and I want to bring some numbers in here and some information. When back in 2019, we asked our community if they believe the system should change so more people can get to more places more quickly, and 84% of the community said yes, right? We then asked in details, what are your priorities? And then what we heard is that riders value more to get to their destination as quickly as possible and to wait as little as possible for the bus. And then when we ask, this is very difficult for Miami, how close the bus stop should be located, right? Majority answered that they will walk a quarter mile or just about 5 minutes longer so the buses will go faster. It was a consistent message from the entire community that we can do better. And it's not easy in Miami, right? Jeff, I know you cannot see me. It's right now about 70 degrees here in Miami, and I'm wearing the overhead wire scarf. So it can tell you, this is what we do. Sometimes it's hotter than 70 degrees. And for people to say, you know what, I'm willing to walk 5 minutes longer so I can have a better service. I'm willing to give up something from my side. So overall, our entire community can move faster. It was very telling. And to me, that's when I said, that's what we need to do. We need to focus on providing better mobility, better outcomes to the community, and leave everything aside. What are we trying to achieve? And on that note, I wanted to kind of get into some of the things that you saw, right? So we asked questions to the community. What were the priorities? What were the elements of a good transit network that the community was telling us? Because again, we're not taking this from a book. This is exactly what the community was telling us. We use data, qualitative and quantitative data, to understand the needs and then transform that or translate that, if you will, into an outcome, into a solution. So what were the things that you saw that we on this plan, what is included in this plan, that it is so in tune with what we heard?
Well, a couple of things come to mind. One of them is that when we kept asking people what would encourage you to use more transit, right? The conversation is twofold. On the one end, you're having this conversation with people that regularly ride the bus, but you're also in the back of your mind always thinking, how can we grow ridership? Because once you resolve one, the hope is that it will increase usage and grow that ridership, right, to support the system. And the resounding comments that came back were that they wanted more frequent service and reliable service, clearly. They wanted access. That's when we get into the conversation of first mile, last mile, and the critical issues of connectivity to the service. Safety kept coming up over and over again, right? And we heard it not only through the BBN process, but also through the process that the current administration has done through a Thrive 305 planning effort. And the last one was that they wanted an improved experience. They wanted to be proud of their daily commute. That gets back to the commuting experience, right? They wanted that experience to be more user-friendly, more engaging, more friendly overall, right? And address a lot of the problems that they were seeing with the system itself. There were a lot of tough conversations also. I mean, when you're looking at a bus redesign, you're looking at models that emphasize ridership versus coverage. And we kept going over that we shouldn't be thinking about quantity only, but also about quality, how often the routes arrive and where they take people to, because we found through data that there was a lot of duplication in our current system. And so those were trade-off conversations, right? In the end, folks opted for a ridership versus coverage model, 70 to 30% overall. And when you had to have the conversation about cutting certain routes and cutting certain services, people felt that the greatest number of people connecting to places with efficient service is where they wanted to end up for the overall system. So what did you find again? I mean, one of the conversations that also came up, what other modes or systems can we connect to, right? So we're not only looking at a bus redesign, but that also brings into light that we're really working to create a very integrated overall transportation ecosystem for the county. And that involves other modes that people will use to get to the bus stations and the transit stops.
Certainly. I often say that there's a lot of conversation about new mobility solutions and, on-demand solutions and all that. And the first thing that I said is there's no substitute for a well-run transit system that moves a lot of people in the same direction at the same time, right? I think that's the beginning of it. But at the same time, our system before this never really designed. You mentioned it was very particular and it had a lot of deviation, and it was spread out to our county. Our county is bigger than some states, right? It is a very large area. I even remember the Brookings Institute doing a research about 10 years ago that says that they ranked the top 100 top metro areas in the nation, and Miami-Dade County ranked number 5 in the list on transit coverage, meaning that the percentage of our population that have a bus stop in front of it is very high. But we ranked number 85 or 86, Grace, in transit service, meaning the amount of people that can go from their home to their typical non-farming job in transit in 90 minutes, like that's an hour and a half, right? And it's like we're spread out too thin. And that was in 2011. Our ridership was, somewhat significant back then. We continue to decline until today, right? And with that, I say that because I think it's interesting for us to focus on what we learned is some people are willing to give a little bit more of their transit so we can put it where actually can carry more people more efficiently and open up opportunity for something else. And the transit is the best solution out there. However, we do acknowledge, and through this effort too, we have launched on-demand transit in areas of low ridership. When we actually have a vehicle, the smaller vehicle can go into neighborhoods and provide better access to transit. Our Go Connect program is increasing its ridership significantly, and we're doing an analysis. It's feeding in through our transit station. We also acknowledge that it is okay to walk and bike, right? And I think we need to do better on it. Right now, we are adding 360 new transit shelters to our network, if you will, and 200 of those will have a new concrete pad with bicycle and racks, right? So it is really trying to promote that activity there. We do have 34 municipalities, 29 of them operate a local circulator. I think it's really interesting for us. And while the Better Bus Network did not focus on changing those routes, it was always expected and acknowledged that this is the backbone, this is a solid foundation. This is not the end, solid foundation for us to do better. And a moment for now the city is to start working with us and providing better access to it. And last but not least, during COVID, you're very familiar with this too. We had to reallocate our resources to be able to meet the demand during the daytime because we're leaving people behind with the social distance requirements. So we took our overnight services and then we had the bus routes that run overnight, took those buses and resources and put them during the middle of the day. And then we didn't want to train people away from transit. And one thing that we learned is that we can actually tap into some private sector mobility solutions like taxis, Ubers, and Lyft to provide particular trips that by no means are in any competition with transit, but can help provide the solution. So yes, we'll look at all this. I think the key takeaway is there's no substitute for a good transit, and we need to work better on our transit system. That's what we're doing with a better bus network. It is a foundation to build on top of it. Has room to grow, but most importantly, start defining the roles, responsibilities, and I'm thrilled about that. And yeah, I think to me is exciting to see how this is not something a consultant or a public agency or someone isolated mentioned. This is something that collectively, between the public, the cities, the municipalities, the advocacy groups, the consultants, and the public agencies, the council members, our commissioners, we all agree. It's hard to say. I'm going to say it, Grace. It was unanimously approved.
Approved. Yes.
In October 5th, 2021. Yes.
And to that point, Carlos, which is an excellent point, it's a foundation to build upon, right? So now we have the system redesigned, but we also have at the table everybody working together to continue to monitor, improve, and work upon this foundation, right? That really speaks to this enormous community input. The system reflects the wants, desires, the needs of the community. And building upon that, as you said, connecting to other modes, focusing on integrating, again, the municipality trolley systems and on-demand services, looking at prioritizing dedicated bus lanes, which is something that we all know and think will greatly improve and make it an even more efficient system, as well as improving those connectivity points through walking, biking, and micromobility. Love that scarf that you have. I think is going to be excellent. One question that I often get is, what are the differences about this project versus other transit or bike or ped projects that we are currently working on or advocating for? And one of the easy answers is, of course, scale, right? And that it required a systems change, systems thinking. It's really a systemic shift for our county, for everybody to start thinking about, again, our transportation ecosystem and how to improve it and how to integrate all modes. For us at Transit Alliance, one of our core goals is really to focus on early action projects so that we can be able to do this needed mode shift from a very car-centric city to a very transit-oriented city, and ensure that we deliver the best public value, right? Versus looking at very long-term plans on the shelf projects. We cannot ask, we realize this and learn this from this process. We cannot ask the public to stay engaged over years and years of planning. Part of the success of the VBN is that we stayed with it. We compressed the period in a very creative way for community input. And that's really what drove the success of the project. We love to focus on driving equity and innovation, right, through integrating planning and investments. And the success of this is proof of concept that we were able to combine research, community outreach, and that planning advocacy really delivered the results that it delivered.
On point. I think this is really, it is, what I was through the process, because it was not easy, right? We have changes in the council, right? In the commission districts, in the commissioner, we have changes even at the cities with different mayors and different council members. We have changes in administration, right? And I was, one of the things that I always focus on in telling everyone was, forget about the final network that gets developed. Let's put that aside. Let's focus on the process. If you trust that the process was done in accordance to what we wanted to do, meaning we heard the community, we asked the right questions, right? We were able to introduce those within our opportunity to redesign a network and then deliver. I have no doubt, my eyes closed, I'll tell you that the final network that was out there is exactly what needed to be because the process was done right. And I say that because I truly believe that to me, that's what stood out, right? The process that we did to achieve on this outcome, right? And particularly, I will urge everyone to say, this is exactly what I need to do for any type of transportation planning, right? Whether it's, whether it's bus network, and I wanted to bring some scale to your numbers. we used to have 99 bus routes and almost 800 buses running around, right?
Right.
Not it's a small agency, not the largest either, but it's mid-sized to large agency. So it was a very system-wide change. If we can do that, and it took us, it was about 2 years, and with COVID delays, it got to 3 years, we actually got this. If we can do this, right, and we solidify the process, I can honestly say, let's take the same process and move forward to implement bike lanes or implement new corridors and things, right? And that to me is what I'm enthusiastic about this. But let's talk about the network, the outcomes, right? Right. I'm thrilled because I tell everyone this is a well-informed, informed is the key there, informed, and reimagined bus network driven by the community. And therefore we see transformative elements such as increased access to frequent routes, right? Improve off-peak service, right? Sometimes in the transportation industry, we get so focused on off-peak, going to work, right? Majority of our trips is not that. And let's take our own examples for it. And the other thing that we saw is about faster journeys, right? However I need to get to where I need to go, I want to get there faster, right? So that to me is what I took in terms of what were the elements that drove the creation of the Better Bus Network.
And so I'll start with some visioning, as we always do in planning, and then bring it down to the data as you did earlier. So for our listeners, imagine a bus system that is fast, frequent, and reliable. And what would that change about your city, right? And so the Better Bus Network for Miami-Dade County, the data points to enormous and impactful benefits countywide. The system is going to double the number of seniors with access to frequent service from what the system was before. Over 350,000 more residents with access to frequent services. And that again is an enormous and impactful benefit as a result of the redesign. And in addition to that, increased frequent service to households without a car by over 66%. So when you look at that data and you understand that the consequences of having a subpar transit system falls heavily on vulnerable members of our society, and that if it's planned to be inclusive and if it provides better service for everyone, it requires this institutional shift. It requires organizations and also transformational leadership. I was going to use a reference of solar eclipse, but you really have the essential components for again, that magical experience in commuting, right? Yeah. And again, trade-offs aside, tough conversations aside, it's just wonderful to look at that benefits data and really see what the impact that's going to have on our county and on our residents.
Great. And for the listeners, I know you mentioned the solar eclipse, and then you mentioned about, differences aside. This is more of a internal story, but I would share with the group in here. It was during the solar eclipse in Miami. I think it was 2017 or 2018, a full eclipse in Miami. And I was on the phone with the Transit Alliance, and we're going into the data, into specific numbers. And we took 45 minutes to have discussions about these things. And ultimately we say, you know what, let's set the data and the numbers aside, and let's focus on what we want and moving the outcomes, right? And what is the real need for us moving forward. And fast forward to today, I believe that we're able to basically fulfill our promise that we'll build a better network. It's not the best, meaning it's not complete. It's a better foundation. But let's be honest too, there was also specific items in areas that we couldn't fulfill. We were not able to deliver. Like, this is not like we magically basically created buses and operators and things around there. We did this full network redesign. We basically multiplied by 4 the corridor of high frequency, meaning 15 minutes or less, all day, every day. And we did that by reallocating our resources more efficiently. And yes, at the end, we increased our budget to tune about $27 million of annualized costs. But even though we still had, Grace, I think it's about 2% of Miami-Dade County residents that will no longer have a service that they have within a walking distance.
Right. Yeah. There were several components that the community requested through the process that were not able to be delivered. But I point back to this trade-off conversation, right, about coverage specifically and about ridership. And that will continue to be an ongoing conversation as we monitor and continue to improve the network. It's not set in stone the way it's designed today, but is a system, as you mentioned earlier, a foundation to keep being improved upon. Politics, also, as always, cutting routes and cutting service. As I mentioned earlier, we have 34 municipalities in the county, represented by 8-9 county commissioners. And so oftentimes, even in chambers, conversations came up, why is this service or this route being cut off, right? Yeah. And you're adding more routes in this particular area. And again, those were tough conversations to have. And so moving forward, as I mentioned, I think we'll continue to monitor, but we also need to understand, and this is something that Transit Alliance is very interested in being engaged in, and that is doing a pre, during, and post-launch behavioral study that really looks at how we connect the impacts of the new system and the impacts that the new system is going to have on the quality of life of our transit riders and non-transit riders, right? And get a baseline of information, because we think that will help planning and future investments specific to transit and mobility.
Agree. And to keep us nimble, right? Right. So little that we know, we're still not out of this health crisis. Right. We're still on the edges of it. The Better Bus Network was developed pre-pandemic, but modified during the pandemic, and still, as we got approved, right, it really shows some indication of what we believe the new normal is, what we believe our community patterns will be. But by continuing to monitor and working together, right, your job is not done at Grace. I'm sorry to tell you, this is for life now. With Transit Alliance, we work in Miami Dade County moving forward. We need to understand what are those communities of need. We learned a lot through the pandemic. We learned a lot about what we used to call transit dependent. All of a sudden basically became our essential employees, right? All of a sudden we realized that without them being able to move around, our cities come to a halt, right? So it's a lot of these things that really kind of resonated and for us moving forward.
Yeah, and you're right, Carlos. I think that ultimately, and this will be moving forward when it comes to transportation planning and delivering transportation projects, we all know we cannot solely rely on the transportation professionals or agencies to deliver, right? Every planning policy decision, investment decision needs to consider approaches to engage and partner with other sectors and with community-based organizations like Transit Alliance, right? And we have built over the years a strong coalition of a variety of a very diverse group of organizations locally. We understand the intersectionality between transit and housing, transit and health, transit and climate resiliency, right? So all these different nonprofits and organizations that are doing amazing work here in Miami are part of Transit Alliance's coalition, which again will continue working with us toward improved outcomes for transit and transit planning specifically. And hey, the infrastructure bill that Biden that was just approved is going to require more and more participatory and community engagement for every planning, transit planning and transit investment throughout the country and specifically to our county.
Excellent. There is definitely a lot for us to work together. And this is the first step towards better transportation systems in Miami. There's a lot of information on I think the website is betterbus.miami. That's the way people can actually get more details about our plan, all the work that we've done in the past, and how we look at all that information. Right now, this new network that we was passed this October 5th is slated to basically go into live in summer of next year. And we're going to continue to work together on it. Wanted to kind of take a minute thinking beyond, this is how we can continue to have a strong relationship between, advocacy groups and transit agencies, right? All the cities ask me, Carlos, why would you do that? How can you get to that point where you feel so comfortable? And what I mentioned to them is we should be open. We should be open to have this conversation. right? I from the beginning, I took it as my personal responsibility to work with organizations like yours, right? And Transit Alliance. I basically, I remember saying to the team, I don't mind if you poke holes or point at us, as long as you have the right information, right? And there's no need for you to do public record requests to get to know what we have. We should be able to be more open, more transparent, and give you that, right? And then I think to me, it is of value to have you as an external resource, your team, your coalition, to look at the information from a different perspective, if you will, right? The right information in your hands can tell us a lot more than we know, right? So on that note, Grace, at the same time, you're a nonprofit organization, right? You focus about, advocate for better mobility, safer streets, and safer use of the public space. But, let's say I give you all this data, I give you access to all this information. How can you handle all this? I think the listeners will be interested to hear, what is the supporting that you have in order to go through the numbers.
Yeah, so we rely on our team in-house to look through that data. We also partner often with organizations, and as I mentioned earlier, that are part of our coalition. Data, it can be data, it's all in how you read the data correctly. So one of the things that we try to focus on, as I mentioned earlier, that we really become translators between these very complex engineering type way to look at these numbers and these sources of information and translate it for the community into a way that they can understand it. And that has really been at the center of the success of Transit Alliance as an organization, that around the time that we came into existence, we really have managed to move the needle and get the community to understand what are the issues that are related and affect transit in our city and that affect their daily commuting. And we'll continue to do that. I think that is one of our strongholds. And we have a process where we start, 3 pillars of our process are research, community engagement, and then the piece on advocacy, which is really about moving our advocates and supporters to action. We also rely on the fact that we know the issues the community faces. We have a trusting relationship with communities and our supporters. And so we have important partners, again, to ensure that all planning and funding that is spent on transportation addresses the local needs and issues that the community wants to see addressed. So going back to this and looking at advice to other cities and for our listeners, again, we cannot emphasize enough that figuring out transit and mobility in Miami and really in any city is a collective effort. And it's one that's going to need to continually leverage the geographic, the historical, cultural, political landscape of every context in which you're working to address the challenges that we have in our time. For us, it's more than just getting from A to B. As I like to often say, transportation is the fabric that binds a city together. And one of the things that we're also seeing, and we all know, is that transportation is a long game, but by leveraging these resources and working together, we can certainly move much faster than we've ever been able to do before.
No, I agree, right? And I think you pointed out earlier that a collection of smaller projects can really go a long way, right? And particularly when we start seeing results now, that's what gives us the trust, right, and the power for us to tell a community, we're going to do more later on. From my point of view, this is not typically a common thing, but I tell my peers in other agencies and cities, open up. There is no reason why be so protected, right? I think if you don't have anything to hide, let's definitely open up. And I think, you'll be surprised, like you say, Grace, like looking at the data from a different perspective, with looking at information, right? And going through the information and merging the qualitative aspects that the writers bring, right? And only organizations like yours have the direct access to writers to really make sure that the quantitative data, it is compatible with the qualitative experience, right? To me, that is critical. Let's open up. My commitment, I've done this via emails on our team, but I would love to really have our information and data more accessible to organizations like yours. I want to be able to foster innovation. And innovation is not about technology. It's about how we address the problems we have at hand. And working together, to me, is one of the most innovative components that we've done over the last couple of years, right? So, and at the same time is we need to identify clear goals and outcomes. Sometimes we get kind of too focused in the details, right? And that's what holds us back. Let's think about outcomes, goals. What's the city we want to live in? What's the city we want to live behind? And that you'll see, it's going to be very difficult to find a public agency and an advocacy group that want different things. If you talk about outcomes, they might want different projects. That's one separate story. Different outcomes is very hard to find.
Yeah. And how we get there is about marrying the different tools and approaches, right? And finding that common ground. And also, I want to point out quickly, Carlos, innovation and creativity. That is one of the things that Transit Alliance, through very clear communications and messaging, making it fun, engaging the public in such a way that we often say can be entertaining. It breaks down barriers where people may come in with a certain preconceived idea that already puts them in an opposing side of the issue. And again, trying through that process, bring them to a common ground. Explaining things right now in our landscape like P3s and how that's going to have an impact on how transit decisions get made. The public right now doesn't know a lot about what that model of delivery means. So we find ourselves being, again, in that role of explaining to the community what the benefits can be of a P3 model of funding projects and so forth. So those are some of the things that we, again, are looking ahead to doing and being able to be helpful with.
And appropriately so. And I think this is excellent for us to continue to leverage our relationship. You talk about innovation and creativity, but I can only see through all that is the word inclusion, right? And I'm thrilled. We have a new mayor in Miami-Dade County, a historic moment, the first female mayor in Miami-Dade County. She's phenomenal. Everyone knows that. But on top of that, she opened an office of inclusion and innovation, right? She really focused her efforts towards that, right? And I think it really resonates the work that we're going to be able to do together beyond the Better Bus Network. Now we build a solid foundation. Now, the sky is the limit. There's a lot of great things we'll be able to do. I'm optimistic about what we're able to do together. Again, I live in Miami, even though I'm wearing a scarf today. My family lives in Miami. I want to see Miami thrive. I want to see Miami to be the city that, not only me, but my kids and my entire family grows. And the way that I see that is a city that I can move around with ease, that I can just use any mode of transportation without any stigma or basically a roadblock, if you will, right? That I can get on a bus, that I can get on a train, that I can get on a bike, feel safe, and know that I can get places, right? And I'm really interesting to me, and particularly what I believe we're doing now. The Better Bus Network is a catalyst. We're working together with you on the delivery of that. We're working together with you on the creation and delivery, if you will, of new bike lanes and protected bike lanes. We're building a city that I want to live in, right? So definitely enthusiastic about that.
Yes, and so are we, Carlos. Thank you for that. Coming off this big win for everybody, we are continued, focused, committed to be able to do the good work and create more positive impact across the county. Today, more than ever, we're committed to that work ahead of building a city that is most transit friendly and multimodal in our state, right? Like you just
in the world. Yes.
Why not? So the past couple of months, I've been working on a strategic plan, what we call a mobility blueprint for Transit Alliance. And what it looks to do is to prioritize for the next 5 years early actions on public transit and support the right type of infrastructure for the BBN, a series of reforms and projects that we want to, again, focus on through our campaigns and our advocacy work. Things like dedicated bus lanes that you just mentioned, looking at our SMART plan, which is a countywide transit and mobility plan. And again, really bringing to the fore the importance of listening and hearing from our community members. And we, again, are very committed to that and very excited about that.
Excellent. So let's do something, Grace. I think this has been a phenomenal conversation.
Yes,
there's a lot more to unpack in what you mentioned. Revolution 2022 is happening here in Miami at the end of the year. I think it's a Halloween weekend, so it's going to be a lot of fun. And I definitely expect you to join us in some panels to talk about the blueprint and how Miami is moving forward. And here's the beauty of it. We're not only going to be talking about what we've done and talking about what we plan to do. We're going to be able to show the community and show the people that are coming in. This is what we're talking about. It's really happening in Miami. Enthusiastic about that. With that said, this has been a phenomenal conversation. I'm thrilled not only to share this coffee talk with you. I do have my coffee with me. So it's been very fun. I'm thrilled to be working with you. I'm really enthusiastic about what's ahead for our community, because now we have a blueprint to still work on how public sector and advocacy groups can work together. And thank you for your work. Thank you for joining this panel today, this session today. And I know it's going to be of great value for cities. I think if you want to leave a final note on how people can reach out to you, if they really want to learn more about what you do and how you help our city.
Absolutely. Thank you, Carlos. And thank you. It's been a pleasure talking about this. Of course, we could go on for hours and anything related to transit. But again, we're very excited of the work the organization has done up till now. As you mentioned, it's an organization really that started up with a group of citizens, really as a startup, and that has really grown to become the voice of our transit riders in the county. And we want to continue to, again, amplify that voice. So we're very excited to be here. We're very excited to be working with you and your team and at the Department of Transportation and Public Works at the county. And we look forward to more coffee talks like this, right? But most certainly we will see you in person as we do and move with great plans for Miami Dade County. So thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you for having me.
And thanks for joining us. The Talking Kidways podcast is a project of The Overhead Wire and posted first at Streetsblog USA. Thanks to our wonderful Patreon supporters for sponsoring this show and Mondays at The Overhead Wire. You can support the show by going to patreon.com/theoverheadwire. You can sign up for our 15-year-old newsletter at theoverheadwire.com. And you can listen to the show on your podcatcher of choice, including Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, and Apple Podcasts. And if you can't find it there, you can always find it its original home at usa.streetsblog.org. We'll see you next time at Talking Headways.